Good morning. Good morning.
Good
Tuesday is
morning.
upon us. How are we doing out there?
Doing well.
I'm having a little technical difficulty. Looks like we're good there. And I think we're good there. Sorry about that. Well, we've got our legal team with us today and Kate Garvey. I know Kate's got a couple of things teed up to talk to us about this morning, but I figured I'd open the floor first and see if anybody's got anything going on a transaction that they want to make sure that they bring to the table, something either that you are struggling with or that you learned on a deal that is in process. What do you got? Nobody.
Steve,
What do you got, Sue?
so well, I had a client that had an issue with the sewer from the house to the street, and they ended up getting that covered by their insurance, which was great. But prior to that, when they scoped it, these contractors were saying, oh, it's going to be 20, 30 grand to get that fixed. And they went on to someone else, and then that company said, look, at just make sure you don't flush or use that, use your bathrooms and stuff. It was dry, and it found that it was the pipe dropped, so causing backup. So they
Yep.
went to their insurance company, and that it was covered. It was something that we talked about a couple of meetings ago. So I just
Yeah,
wanted to
look,
bring that out to you, everyone.
yeah. I mean, I'm shocked that it was covered by the insurance. Typically what insurance is looking for is something that happens suddenly, and they're not going to cover wear and tear or things that happen over time. I spent 2 long years of my life doing insurance adjusting, and I know that they take this very serious. When I would go out to these properties, if it looked like it's something that happened over time, they're not going to cover that. They are looking for, tree fell, hit your house, sudden accident. You know, I know there's some places where there's no wind coverage, but we get a big windstorm and it rips your roof off. That's a single event. It wasn't happening over time.
Yeah, they were in
You
the
know,
house 6 months, and then all of a sudden everything was backing up.
yeah.
So
I mean,
I don't know if that was it.
yeah, I don't know how there'd be a single event that's going to cause that pipe to break and back up. I guess in theory, I remember I showed up for a final walkthrough one time, and the people were moving from Massachusetts to Florida, and they had a lot of stuff, and they hired a professional moving company to move them down there. But this was like a 3,000 square foot house, so it was an 18 wheeler that they loaded this stuff up onto. Well, the people the moving company backed up that 18 wheeler up over the front lawn to the front door instead of like leaving the tractor trailer in the street and walking the stuff out. They literally backed it up. So I show up for final walkthrough. We've got probably 2 foot ruts, in the ground. And in a situation like that, I could see how a sewer pipe could get cracked. To me, that is, hey, one-time incident, cracks the pipes. They're going to cover something like that. So those are the types of things. So I don't know how they went about getting coverage on that one. It'll be interesting if that ever comes about to see, if somebody knows, or maybe we ask Dowd the next time we've got our insurance company on with us. So anybody else have something going on a deal that's just interesting, weird, different, that'd be a good share for the group? All right, Kate, well, let's give you the floor. I know you've got an interesting topic teed up for us this morning. Take it over.
Well, interesting. I don't know, but
For attorneys, it's interesting.
It's interesting to
Oh,
me.
yes. Yeah.
So today I'm going to talk about power of attorney. I've been seeing, you see them in every closing in some way, shape, or form, but not the way I'm going to talk about them. Like every sale, the seller has to sign a power of attorney that allows the attorney's office to sign documents, so they don't have to come back, like bank docs or things like that. Those are typical. Those are, a couple of pages, simple, just, you're giving me the power to sign on you on behalf of just this one closing, right? Like it doesn't extend beyond that. Those are typical. We see them in every closing. I'm talking about the ones that are not typical. So a power of attorney is a written legal document where you give whomever you list the power to handle things, financially, legally, things like that. There's a healthcare power of attorney too, but we don't need to talk about that. This is more for real estate transactions. So we see powers of attorney sometimes because someone's overseas. It's like for if somebody is, deployed somewhere and they want to buy a house, you can give power of attorney to a wife or somebody over the age of 18 to sign legal documents for you. Sometimes it's because the person is incapable of signing, whether they have dementia or, are sick in a hospital and unable to physically, sign a legal document, and that can be for sales and buys. That's another reason why you see a power of attorney. Lately I've been seeing some powers of attorney, simply because the person's not going to be there for closing, but it's because they scheduled a vacation and whatnot. Although those can be allowed, I've seen a lot of pushback lately for situations like that. Like if it's on the sale side, well, why can't the seller sign early? Fair, right? Or, they just signed a power of attorney. Why can't they sign a deed? I've been seeing a lot of pushback on the sale side from other attorneys because they have to, let me back up a second. If there is a power of attorney involved in your transaction, so let's say you're selling grandma's house, you're the power of attorney because grandma has dementia. As your attorney, I'm going to ask for a copy of that. I will need the original for recording because I have to see that in that document if it gives you the power to sell. Some don't. So if there's no power to sell, now we have an issue, right? Which can delay closing depending on, if I stick with my dementia, example, we might have to get a court appointed, conservatorship or guardian for you to be able to sign things, which
Okay,
obviously
I'm gonna interrupt you for a second. So, is the basic structure of every power of attorney that one, we're talking about a timeline? Is there always a timeline? Like you talked about, hey, just for this period of time, so I can do this one closing. So, does there have to be a timeline on a power of attorney, or no?
No, it's actually better if there's not, right?
Okay.
So a power of attorney, at least the ones that I draft, that person can act the moment it's signed, right? Because you could be away on vacation and I could say, hey, Steve, you're my power of attorney. Can you just go sign this bank document for me for whatever? Because it's time sensitive, right? And then there's, power of attorneys that kick in once you're not mentally capable of signing, right? So like it's good to not have a time frame on, but it's also important that the document is properly drafted. No offense to LegalZoom, but if you go to LegalZoom, you may not be getting a document that is sufficient that will pass underwriting, that passes state specific, rules, because every state has different rules about what the power of attorney needs to, whether it needs to be witnessed and notarized, just notarized, whatever. It's state specific as well. So you have to be careful when you're, family members getting these or friends getting these, that they're properly drafted, because if I get a power of attorney and it's not properly drafted, now I have a problem, right? It kind of depends on the situation. If they can't sign another document,
Right.
like now we have to get the court involved. If they're just simply away on vacation, we can figure something like that out, but it needs to be properly drafted. And I've been getting a lot of pushback down to the notary clause and how they're drafted from underwriters and title insurance companies lately. So it is important that if you're dealing with a client and off the bat, okay, we need a power of attorney for this, that you get those documents to the attorneys quickly so we can review them and make sure they're okay.
So
And then
I'm going to
obviously,
have you pause again. So we don't have to have a time frame, but could we? Hey, this is in effect only for the next 30 days. We could add that clause.
yeah, you never really see that, but you
You
could
could.
technically.
Okay.
Um,
So you got potentially just as open-ended, but then we're also you've talked about the different types of powers of attorney. So the next thing it's got to basically describe is, what is this power of attorney for? Is it for healthcare? Is it for the sale of a piece of real estate? Is it, even wider and a greater breadth of what it could cover? So there's somewhere in that
Right.
power of attorney that you're saying, what am I giving you power for?
Correct.
Yep.
And for real estate purposes, you need to have the power to sell. And that's not in every, legal document, I include them in my powers of attorney, but they're not, just because I do doesn't mean everybody else does, right? So like, you really need to get the eyes on it to make sure that you can use that power of attorney, and it meets all the qualifications.
So
the
then,
state.
then let's start from a real estate agent's perspective. What are some of the red flags that should go up that, hey, I'm probably going to need a power of attorney on this deal?
I mean, dementia, right? So if you're selling a property for an older person who, doesn't have the capability of signing anything, or not even that, could be a disabled person in general, you know, somebody's going to have to sign these documents, right? So that should be a red flag. Like, okay, does somebody have power of attorney? If somebody is overseas, if somebody's not going to be there, because I usually send out a questionnaire and I ask, will you be present at closing? Does this need to be a mail away? Is there a power of attorney? Like I ask these questions, so like I know in advance. But not everybody does that. But if you know that your client's not going to be in the country, let's say around the closing date, that's kind of an important thing, right? Like on either side, buy or sell, you should know, because a power of attorney might be needed. And if one doesn't exist and the person's capable of signing and whatnot, I'm happy to draft one, but they have to get it witnessed and notarized and get it back to me. So depending on where they are, it could be a pain in the butt, right? But doable. And you need to get it approved by both sides, whatever side you're on, and the lender as well. So it's important to know about this early on. Like, you don't want to find out that a power of attorney is needed the night before closing, because that means the closing is not happening. Because it goes back
Okay,
to
so hey, we're not physically going to be in the area. We've got somebody who mentally maybe isn't there or physically isn't capable of signing. Anything else that's coming to mind of like, hey, this is another scenario where it's probably going to be required?
I've seen it. I just had a closing. Actually, it's closing today, where there was some mental health issues. Um, you know, the seller was struggling, so his father was kind of, stepping in. But I got a lot of pushback from the other side. He's like, well, if he can sign a power of attorney, why can't he sign a deed? Which is true. Like I met with him, made sure that he was, okay. There's a whole bunch of steps that I do when it's a question. Um, so we ended up not using the power of attorney, but we did have one. So mental health is another.
Okay, so a couple of things that are coming up. First question I'm seeing, what if I've got a power of attorney that's like, it's 10 years old, but it's, let's say, first scenario, it's got a license to sell. It's 10 years old. Doesn't matter. Okay, we're good to go. Now, I've got a power of attorney. It doesn't have the license to sell clause. Do we just, can we do an addendum to a power of attorney? Do you need a full new power of attorney? Like, how does that process work?
You can do an addendum. So if the person is capable to sign something new, I would just do a whole new power of attorney and have them sign it. Like that would be something if you were overseas or something like that. But if you're not capable because you have, you're struggling, dementia, for example, now we have an issue, because nobody legally has the power to sell. So you'll have to go to the court and get that.
How long could that process take?
I mean, it's probate, so if everybody's on the same page and everybody's agreeable and you get all the documents, I mean, it's going to take a few months, because you need to get, the doctor has to fill something out that says they're not capable of signing, and you have to go to court and get it all approved. But if everybody's in agreement and no one's fighting, month or so, 2 months, kind of like the petition to sell. But then you have to go through that. You have to get. Yeah, a couple months. I'll just leave it at that. Couple months, give or take.
So next question is, who can be granted, in specific, the power of attorney? And specifically, have you ever seen the agent be granted the power of attorney?
Good question. Honestly, I can't. Or somebody from my office cannot be granted power of attorney. I have seen agents be granted power of attorney. That is a lender question, because sometimes lenders do not like that. But I have seen it. done in the past. So I think it's definitely, that's a question to ask your lender if one is needed. Other than that, it's usually spouses, family members, friends. You can really appoint anybody you're comfortable with signing. But when it comes to the actual agent themselves, to ask the lender.
Any other questions on power of attorney? Just seeing in
And
the
like, I
comments,
can't reiterate enough.
Carolina's just putting in the comments that she signed for relocation clients during COVID.
I did that closing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's important to know this up front at the beginning, because if there are any issues, now we have time to fix them, right? It's important to get that document as soon as you can and provide it. I always ask for it, but if you know there is one, get it out there just so we can make sure there's no issues. Because it is really not fun when you're ready to close and you're at the finish line, and something pops up and it, derails you.
So I did see here, just doing a little bit of research prior to the show, the different types. So you've got the general power of attorney, you've got this durable power of attorney, you've got springing power of attorney. Can we just kind of talk to these different power of attorneys? Like, what are these referring
Sure.
to?
You'll never really see springing is kind of weird, and it's very state specific. So springing is your power of attorney comes into play. It springs into play when something happens. So if you're incapacitated in some way, shape, or form, it springs in. Now your power of attorney can act. The general and durable are pretty much the same thing. Durable is once it's signed and notarized and ready to go, you can act as power of attorney. You don't need to be incapacitated or anything like that. Those are what you see primarily. Like my durable power of attorney are like 20 pages because it includes a lot of stuff. It talks about trusts, it talks about real estate, it talks about all of these things. That's not all pertinent to a sale of real estate. You really only need that one clause that says you can sell. But a well-written, well-drafted power of attorney gives you a power to do a lot of things. General is more, this is just for the real estate. This is, I'm appointing you to do, the sale of 123 Parker Street. And for the record, everybody should have a power of attorney and a healthcare proxy. Because you never know what happens in life.
Yeah. So let's talk about that, right? When you say everybody should have one, this is just, good practice, whether you're trying to sell real estate or not, that, hey, if something were to happen to me, these people can make certain decisions. And why is it that the healthcare one has got to be separate? Just because it's more detailed, or could you actually technically do the health stuff inside of a power of attorney, or does it have to be done in this separate?
My power of attorneys do talk about the healthcare in them, but you really need to have a specific one to healthcare. You can combine them, but you don't really see that often. It's better to have two separate ones, because like the healthcare proxy only comes into play when you are incapacitated and cannot make your own decisions. So, you're in a coma, God forbid, and decisions need to be made. That's when your healthcare power of attorney, right? Healthcare power of attorney doesn't kick in when you're sitting there and you're fine and just need to make a decision for yourself. So it is kind of important, and they deal with such different things, end of life, do not resuscitate, that kind of stuff, which is very, specific and whatnot, where the, a durable power of attorney is kind of like an all encompassing kind of thing. So that's why.
Let's just talk about that one in general. What are, some reasons why you're recommending that everybody should just have one of these in place? Is it for like health related things where
because bad things happen to good people. I mean,
yeah.
That's why everybody should have estate planning stuff in check. But, something happens to you, and, for example, I was appointed an attorney for a gentleman who, this was years ago, who was breaking up a fight at whatever it's called now, Xfinity Center, and fell and hit his head, and he was brain dead. And he was 34 years old. 34 years old, 2 kids, the whole nine. He had nothing in place. Had he had something in place, his family would have been allowed to make their decision to, let him pass and whatnot. But instead, because he did not, we spent 3 days in court, getting permission to make that decision. And that was just horrendous to see a family have to go through that, even though everybody was on the same page. So just having something in writing that says these things, it's honestly more for your loved ones, because when these are needed, you're not usually in the right, you're not there to make those decisions. But it just takes the court out of everything. um, you know, for example, real estate, if you have this, like, if you have the language in there to sell, now you're not going to court, so you can move things along faster. Simple documents that don't cost that much money. I think healthcare power of attorney and durable power of attorney are the most important documents you can have while you're here. Because you don't want a court telling you what to do. You don't want a court holding things up. You just don't want to go to court. So it's kind of good to put things in, and you can always change these documents until you can't. So, you have Adam as your power of attorney, and then you decide not to because Adam is, turns into a bad guy, which I could never see, but you know what I mean? You can switch it and now put your wife or what have you. Or if you have your wife and God forbid you get divorced, you can switch it to Adam. So you can always change them too. I just think they're smart things to have in life. But for real estate purposes, the durable power of attorney is just smart because you never know.
What kind of questions do we have for Kate on this topic? Either whether it comes to real estate transactions or just this stuff in general. I know Kate does a lot of estate planning stuff as well as real estate. And these are some of the relationships that you want to form, with your attorney. Maybe it's not just somebody that you're doing a real estate closing with, but oftentimes your clients are going to need to start to make more of these decisions and put more of these things in place once they become homeowners. So it's kind of nice that Kate's able to do both. Any just general, even if it's just a question that you're curious about for yourself regarding this estate planning and power of attorney and healthcare proxy, any kind of questions along those lines? We don't have to
And
keep
for
it
any
to real
parents
estate.
out there, when your child turns 18, you should have them made for them as well, because they're legally adults. And you would think that you'd be able to access information or act a certain way, but legally you cannot. So powers of attorney once your kids reach 18, and healthcare proxies are huge. If you're one of my friends, your kids get them for their 18th birthday.
So
Happy
just
birthday!
talk a little bit more about that specifically, right? So my kid turns 18, right? And I don't have the power of attorney in place. Like, what are some things like, just give me some examples, like worst case scenarios, some stuff that you've seen.
So, your kid's 18, right? We all remember what we were like at 18, and we were not by any means, adult enough to make some of life decisions, right? So, like, my son goes to school, he goes to school in Pennsylvania. If something happens to him and he's in a hospital and whatnot, they're not going to necessarily talk to me just because I'm his mom, because he's an adult, right? They don't know my relationship with him. Maybe he doesn't want me to know anything. So you do have to provide those kind of documents sometimes to say, hey, I need this information about my kid. And you would think at 18 you can get that, but legally a hospital can tell you no.
Gotcha.
So I think that's super important, right? And then, like, the power of attorney kind of thing is, once again, your kid's in college, you can help him with his bank account, you can, whatever. The durable power of attorney may not necessarily come in as much as a healthcare power of attorney when they're young, but still. Like, I have a friend whose son is in the Marines, and she had to take care of something like a ticket from a car or something like that. And she had to go to the DMV with her power of attorney and say, I can do this for him. And they allowed her to fix the issue. So, little things like that, it's helpful. But like, you think just because your kid's 18 that you're still the parent and have all this control, but legally they're an adult. So it's better to have some things in place, because you never know.
Question coming up around just some costs to prepare these docs.
It really kind of depends. I think a lot of places, some attorneys do hourly for that kind of stuff. Some do flat fees. I'm a flat fee kind of person. When I do estate plans, I do, a living will, power of attorney, healthcare power of attorney, HIPAA, which gives you permission to get medical records, and a will, right? So that's usually about $750. If you don't need one document, you don't need another, okay, we can talk prices. When you go into trusts, which is another whole thing that I could talk about, that's when prices kind of go up because trusts are much more involved. But and then you can go to LegalZoom and get things for cheaper, but you're also getting LegalZoom documents which aren't necessarily state specific or specific to everything you need, because you can be pretty specific in these documents. If you want to, I've had a woman who, when she passed away, she wanted to be cremated and put into the gas tank of her Harley. And I put that in there. You know, you can be as specific or as general as you want with these documents. Whereas if you're using a platform online, you can't always do that. So just err on the side of caution. You always get what you pay for.
Lauren, your hand's up.
Any fear of like abuse or misuse of that power, right? So have you ever seen it where somebody puts one of these power of attorneys into play just in case, and then somebody uses it when they, may not have, to go get information from the bank, to go pull some medical records from somewhere? Because I could see that being, a concern as well. We put them into place when we're healthy, think we're not going to need to ever have them used, and somebody does. It's like, what?
It happens, unfortunately, way too much. Um, Especially, I mean, I see elder abuse all the time, and it makes me sick to my stomach. But a lot of times people just put their kids, right? I'm going to put my kids as this because they're my kids and they should have this power. And that's not always the truth, because maybe your kid has a drug problem, maybe your kid has a gambling problem, maybe your kid just likes to spend, and all of a sudden your money's getting dwindled because you gave them that power. So, you know, yes, it gets abused often. That's why I think it's incredibly important to pick who you appoint as these people, like take that really, really seriously. And sometimes your family members aren't the best ones. Sometimes it's a friend, sometimes it's a professional. You know, I've acted as power of attorney before, and or at least been a backup, it does happen. I always say review your stuff every year to make sure you still want that person there, because life happens. You could be the best person in the world one day and the next day something happens and now you're struggling with things and you make bad decisions. So it happens. But there, if that happens, I see it a lot because I do a lot of probate too. There's, unfortunately, you're going to end up in court kind of fighting over that stuff. But yeah, so just be careful who you do appoint, and know that you can change it until you can't. So if somebody, seems like a good fit initially, but isn't, you can always change it.
Just got
But
a
it's
question.
also, oh, sorry.
Go ahead, Kate.
I was just going to say, like, when it comes to me, when I get a power of attorney, I ask a lot of questions. Why do we need this? Is it because I want to know, okay, grandma's in the hospital with dementia. Okay, great. Because then it kind of seems more legit to me, right? If like it seems a little funky, ask a lot more questions, because there are scams out there. People do nasty things. So I like to make sure I feel comfortable with the power of attorney being used. Usually it's pretty self-explanatory, like dementia, or I'm, overseas, for work.
Just general question coming up regarding putting child's names on the deed. Right? So I own a house. Is there a certain time, place, point where I'd want to add my kids to the deed?
If you want my opinion, do not do that. Because anybody you add to the deed, it becomes their property too. So it becomes their property for, if their kid's trying to get, financial aid, that property is factored into it, right? So it could mess up, your world for that. Everybody has to agree to sell. So if somebody wants to be a jerk, doesn't want to sell, here we go. Now we're in court again, right? You put your two kids on the deed because everybody loves each other and everybody's healthy and great. And then all of a sudden, Joe gets into a car accident, becomes addicted to pain meds, and hates his sister. And now what do we do, right? Like there's so many icky situations that can happen. I really do not like to put other people on deeds. I am a huge believer in trusts, which I'm happy to talk about, not today, but I'm happy to talk about that maybe next time. I could talk about that forever. So I think trusts are a better way to go for that, to be honest with you, just because I'll say it 1,000 times, bad things happen to good people. And when you're putting somebody on a deed, it becomes their property too. So, we all know what can happen with bad families and bad situations. It just makes life more difficult. So I am not a huge fan of that, but ultimately it's up to the client. I think that you need to be careful if the person's elderly, because there's Medicaid implications, which I will not get into at all. But there's like a 5-year look back, so you have to be careful when you're doing it if they're elderly. But other than that, I just think you have to be very careful who you add to the deed, because it becomes their house and their problems now become your problems too.
All right, well, we are up against it. I'm sure there's a lot more and definitely requests coming that we do something on trust. So maybe we can hit that next Tuesday when you join us. So This was great. Really appreciate your time. As always, we'll wrap up here just with a quick look at the trainings that are available today. Let's get over to the right screen. So what do we have today? 4 different opportunities, trends and tactics, mastermind group. I don't know what that is. Let's look at this. This is just all in Spanish, so I cannot translate that. So I'm not sure what that training is about. If you can speak Spanish and you're on the call, maybe you could let me know what that is. Results in less time with AI. So if you're somebody interested in AI, this might be a good one for you. And building a pipeline of first-time home buyers. That's what we have available. So appreciate you guys as always. Great Tuesday. Thanks again, Kate, and we will do it
You're
again
welcome.
tomorrow morning. Take care.
Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kate.